So first off, I'm just going to edit in Adobe Camera Raw. These are the two images that I'm going to edit today. I'm going to combine these two images. I like the framing of this one, and I like the poses of this one, so I'm going to combine these two later on, but I'm going to start with editing all three of these in ACR. So I'm going to open in Photoshop, and then I'm going to duplicate my background layer so I keep my original inside my document. I'm going to call the background layer original, and the new layer I'm going to call edit. And then with my edit layer selected, I'm going to go to filter, camera raw filter. This is how you access the camera raw filters when your file is not a JPEG. If it's anything else, any other file type, you can access it there through the filters menu. So from here I'm going to do my base edits. This is just my editing program of choice. You can use Lightroom, you can use whatever. The concepts are all essentially the same. So first off, I'm going to decrease the exposure a bit, pop up the clarity, give it a little more saturation, bring down the highlights to make the blue in the sky pop, and bring up the shadows to give us a little more detail that we would have lost otherwise, and make up for that lightness with bump in contrast. I'm going to bring the saturation back down. Okay. So that's looking pretty good as far as base edits go. If you press P, you can toggle back and forth between your edits that you just made and your original. So that's looking pretty decent to me. I'm going to just commit these changes, and I'm going to rename this layer to base edit because I'm going to edit the skin tones and the eyes separately, as is how I always do portraits. So I'm going to call this base edit and duplicate that layer and call this one eyes. I'm going to jump back into camera raw filters. And then I'm going to use a brush adjustment to edit both sets of eyes, really make them pop a bit more. They're a very important part of portraits, and it's an easy way to liven up your portrait and make it a little more interesting. This one doesn't need much. It's already a really great shot. Very captivating looks in both faces, and just an easy focus. So it's not going to take much. I'm going to keep it subtle for this one. Bump up my size. Go ahead and zoom in first. Looks like 3 pixels would be good. I'm going to have overlay checked and mask checked. I only have the mask check when I'm first drawing the adjustment area so that I can see exactly what I'm doing and make this as detailed as I can. I think one of the more important parts of portrait editing is being as precise as you possibly can. Use the capabilities of your program. Almost all of them have the zoom in tool, so just get nice and close and use a small brush, and it should come out good. I like to just get the outer edges first, kind of like coloring in a picture, and then go ahead and fill in the insides. For that, you can make your brush a little larger. Alright, so now I'm going to pop back out and take the mask and the overlay off. I'm going to reset local correction settings, and that's just going to reset the settings that are on that spot adjustment. And so that's the original settings, and now I'm going to go in and do some stuff that I normally do for the eyes and to make them pop. First off, I'm going to bump the clarity up, not too much, but enough to make the eyes sparkle. I reset it there so you can see the effect again. It just makes the reflection in the eye pop a little more. Then from there, I'm going to jump the saturation up so you can get a little bit more color in there. And I'm going to brighten the whites. So you can see that just brings out the brightness a little more. And I'm looking specifically at this part of his eye here. There was some interesting shadows going on there, so I'm trying to make those a little less dramatic. In Photoshop, I can go back in and, you know, correct anything close up that I feel like, you know, is an unflattering shadow or highlight. That's what the dodge and burn is all about. Bring the blacks down a little bit so you can see the pupil. Bring the exposure up, that'll help the white of the eye a little bit as well. So I'm going to press P so we can see where we've come. We just made the eyes pop a little more, gave them a little more detail. You don't want to be too crazy with this kind of edit. I think, you know, the benefit of doing this in layers like I'm doing is that I can change the opacity of that eye layer and make the effect a little more subtle that way as well. So I'm going to go ahead and edit the father's eyes now. Let's see. Get that size down. So I'm going to pop on the overlay and the mask again so I can make this new adjustment brush. Make sure adjustment brush is set to new and not add. That will add to your old adjustment brush on the boy's eyes. And then erase, you can go back in, and with your mask on you can take off parts of the area where you messed up if you did. You can also use Control Z, classic undo. Getting to know the keyboard shortcuts in your main programs is a very good thing to do. When I first started out, I just kind of beat it into my head by forcing myself to only use the shortcuts. Alright, so now that that's selected, I'm going to zoom out a bit and adjust the sharpness of his eyes the same way. I think what happened was it gave me the exact same edits here and made his eyes pop a little bit more. Let's see here. Since he's farther back, there's more shadow in his eyes, so I'm going to reduce those a bit. We don't want it to look unnatural, so we gotta keep it subtle. So that's plus 11. Let's go ahead and brighten up the highlights. So that's looking pretty good to me. As you can see, it just brightened them up a little bit. So from there, I'm going to click OK and commit to those changes on the eyes. And from there, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate the base edit again. Call that layer faces. Bring that up to the top. As you can see, when I toggle off the faces layer, you can see the changes that were done to the eyes there. Just made them pop a little more. So now I'm going to edit faces in Camera Raw. And from here, I'm going to apply a spot adjustment to each face. And for this, I'm just going to select the face with a big brush and then deselect the eyes with a small brush. So let's see, put the mask on. If you're really wanting to frustrate yourself, try this on a trackpad on a laptop and you'll be frustrated in no time. Alright, so I've got that selection down. Let's turn off the overlay and mask and reset local corrections. And for his face, I think I want to brighten it up a little bit, give it a little more saturation. Taking down the clarity on a face will get rid of some of the unflattering shadows and the way that the light's hitting it and some of those fine details that aren't really necessary sometimes. But you just don't want to take too much away from the face. You want to keep it looking natural. Jack up the contrast there to make the shadows a little more defined. You can even bring down the highlights to give the face a little more detail. Alright, so his face is looking pretty good, and I actually don't mind it being over top of the eyes. It's not really doing much, so I'm just going to leave it. Go in and edit his face now, make sure new is selected on the options there, and go in with a large brush and select his face. Turn on my mask. We don't really need to get into the beard too much, the hair. Alright, so we don't need to do much with his face, I don't think, so this should be pretty easy. I think we could use a little desaturation. Oh, okay, we got some adjustments on here. I'm going to reset those. Let's see. And for these kind of edits, you're going to want to go in at 100% or close to it. I usually back off a little bit so I can see everything that I'm editing. I think that looks pretty good. So there you can see what I've done to the edits I've done to the face. Click OK and commit to those changes. So now there's a couple things I want to try to patch up here. We got a little bit of snot here. I want to take this patch of hair off his beard here, clear up that cheek area, and then correct a few inconsistencies in the skin here in the forehead. So I'm going to go back and you can do this one of two ways. You can go inside of Camera Raw and use the spot healing tool in there. It's called the spot removal tool, and it works a lot like the adjustment brush, where you have a size and an amount of feather. The amount of feather is shown to you by the solid line to the dotted line. That amount of space in there is the amount of feather. You'll see it go down as you adjust the slider. But all you do is click and hover over the circle that you want it to sample from, and you'll see it take the spot out, and it's pretty intuitive. So this is a very easy way to get rid of small inconsistencies. See if it'll work for here. No, it's not going to work for there. So I'm just going to undo that. I'll get into that in Photoshop. And then for his cheek, I think we might be able to see how that looks. It's not too bad. I can touch it up in Photoshop. So those are the changes I'm going to make with the spot removal tool. It doesn't have as much capability as Photoshop's clone tool. You have a lot more flexibility in Photoshop. As per usual, it's just a more complicated program. So I'm going to click OK. That'll take care of those two things. And then with the faces layer selected, I'm going to fix this spot on his cheek that's left over. With the clone stamp tool in Photoshop, you can grab parts of an image and pretty much paste it somewhere else. And when you do that with a brush that has zero hardness, it does it in a gradual way that blends really well, and it's a great way to, you know, get rid of anything in a photo. So I think I'm going to grab over here on his other cheek. Let's see what that looks like pasted in here. Okay, so let's create a new layer so that we can do this non-destructively and call it patch. And we're gonna alt click on the one side, and as you can see, the little patch is on the brush there itself, so you can see what you're doing. And then with the patch layer selected, so you're not doing it on your original, you just brush in what you did. And I have an opacity of 14% right now, so it's doing it very gradually. As you can see, the edges aren't exactly the way that you would want, so with that patch layer selected, you just go ahead and put a mask on there, and with a brush that's black and definitely not 5,000 pixels. You know, a nice small brush with 0% hardness. Go ahead and brush off the hard edges. And then with the patch layer selected, you can drop the opacity to make it look natural, or you can even change the blending layer and play with that until it blends in nice with the skin. I think in this layer I'm just gonna do it on normal and drop the opacity down. So that's looking pretty decent. And then I'm going to do the same thing here. I might actually just use a brush tool, but I'm going to do it similar. Call this patch. And then with the eyedropper tool, or eye on the keyboard, I'm going to select certain colors and just paint over, you know, the areas that have snot on them. Now I'm using a combination of Alt and the right mouse button, holding that down and going left and right to control the diameter of a brush, and up and down for hardness. I really love that shortcut. And if you hold Alt, it'll bring your eyedropper up so you can sample a new color really easily. As you can see, this is coming out dark, but I'm going to go in and change the opacity and use a mask to blend out hard edges here in a minute. So. So now I'm going to play with the blending mode on this patch layer, and this is just the detail inside the nostril there. So I'm going to go ahead and toggle through these here. Darken looks pretty decent. Let's go into 100%. Alright, so I think our best option is, again, normal, and just applying a layer mask to lighten this up. So 0% hardness, the black brush, going to go in and just lighten these edits up. Just get around the edges with it. You can always drop your opacity down too when you're doing this to make it a bit more subtle. So now I'm going to brush out. If you press D, you get your default foreground and background, white and black. And then X toggles back and forth between the two. Alright, so that looks pretty good as far as that part goes. We're going to go ahead and call this nostril patch, and it was cheek patch. And now we're going to go in and get the rest of this. Same concept, new layer. Call this lip patch, and this time we can use the stamp tool here. So the rubber stamp tool selected, you're going to go ahead and select a patch from the lip or from the faces layer there and just paste it on top of the lip patch. And again, I've got a very low opacity going on, so it's subtle. And that looks okay. You can have some snotty. I mean, he's a young boy, that's a natural thing, so just trying to make it a little more subtle here. I think other than that, I'm not going to mess with it much more. So I think I'll give him a little patch right here. And the visual cue it gives you is nice because you can line up the shadow fairly easily. This is a fairly newer feature of Photoshop, so I'm just going to mask out anything that was overdone there at about 15%. That looks pretty good. So I think we're in pretty good shape for him and for him on the face. So this is looking pretty good to me. I'm going to group all of these together in a layer called Faces. So now I'm going to duplicate my base edit layer and call that Blur. Bring that up to the top, and I'm going to apply a Gaussian blur under Filter, Blur, Gaussian blur. I'm going to adjust that until this patch of sky here looks nice and blurred. Draw attention to the subject. So I think that's pretty good. Don't want it to be too much or it'll look fake. So from there I'm going to create a black layer mask by holding Alt and clicking the layer mask button on your layers panel. And now I want to trace this area very precisely to apply white to this layer mask. So I'm going to go in, and in the second screen mode, by pressing F you can switch screen modes. I'm going to zoom into that area, and with the pen tool or P on the keyboard, it's this tool here, you're going to want to make sure path is selected, and you're going to trace this patch of sky. So you're going to want to try to be as precise as you can. To use this tool, you just create anchor points, and then you can create another anchor point by clicking and holding. You can create this arc. If you just click once, you'll just get a straight line. So you click and hold and then drag your bars to make the arc, and just try to line it up and make it look like a clean arc, no jagged lines. This tool takes some practice, but it's definitely worth getting used to, because this is how you should be doing precise layer masks to make you get those crisp edges. Once you get the hang of it, you can do it fairly quickly. It's tedious, but it's worth it. And when you get to a point where you have a arc here with two lines coming off of it, you hold Alt and click your anchor point to create another point going off in a different direction. If you don't click Alt like that and you just keep going, it's going to continue your arc however it sees fit. So you gotta Alt click, and that will turn that into an anchor point, and you can continue on. Alright, so my path is closed here, and you can see your path selected. And what this is you have your work path that you just created with your pen tool, and your work path is selected, so that your path is selected. So once you close it, you can continue working on this work path with the pen tool in different areas. So that's what I'm going to go ahead and do now, is get these other areas of sky. And as you close your path, you'll see that circle pop up, and that just confirms that you just closed your path. This patch is probably not going to make much difference, but I'm going to do it right. And then this last little patch here. I think that's a dot on his shirt. So that'll do right there. Once you have your work path done, you hold Control, you'll see that little dotted square pop up, and you click on your thumbnail and your work path. It'll add a selection to what you just traced, and then with your layer mask selected, press Shift and F5, or you can come up to Edit and click Fill and fill with white, and that's going to fill white onto your layer mask and mask in the blur that you just created. So from there, this is looking the way I want it to look, so I'm going to group all of these layers that make up the image, call it image. So now we're ready to move on to the final part of the tutorial, which is dodge and burn. So for the dodge and blur, I like to go with a technique that I found online. You go ahead and create a new layer with options by pressing Control Shift in, and then name that dodge. Set the blending mode to overlay, and check the box fill with overlay neutral color, and then do the same thing again. Control Shift in, and call that one burn. And to make this a little less harsh, we're going to use soft light mode and check the box fill with soft light 50% gray. Go ahead and group those, call it dodge and burn. Now I'm going to start with the burn and intensify some of the shadows in here, hopefully drawing some focus towards the faces. So with a black brush, 0% hardness, and opacity of 30, I'm going to brush in some of these shadows and intensify them a little bit. You want to be subtle with this, and if it's a little too much but you like where you're going with it, you can lower the opacity of the burn layer and take it down a little bit. So I'm just going to go ahead and intensify some of these shadows here. You can play with it, you know, and see what you want to do, what's flattering and what's not flattering, and it's just a good way to make stuff pop. These dog tags are a good side note to have on here, so I'm going to darken those shadows. This picture tells a really good story, so you know we want to highlight certain parts of it. Play with the diameter a little bit so you can have more gradual shadows, and use Control Alt and Z to undo anything that you don't necessarily like once you do it. So you have a little bit of control here. So let's go back and look what I just did here. This is my burn layer here. I'm going to toggle it on and off and show you where I went with the burn. So now I'm going to mess with the dodge layer, and you do the same thing but the opposite. So press X and toggle your foreground to background, and with a white brush at 30%, go ahead and paint in anywhere you want the highlights to show a little more. So I like this bandana. I want to make it a little more in your face, and so I brighten it up with a little bit of dodge. Brighten up the eyes a little bit. And if it's too much, you just take the opacity down. So as you can see, the Dodge added in some nice highlights. Got some in on the dog tags and the chain there, and a little bit on both subject's eyes, and a little bit on the bandana. So that gave it a little more color. I think from here you could probably go in and put some burn in on the background here to make it a little darker. See how that looks. Yeah, I do like that. So I'm going to go in and burn a little bit of the sky. Gives it a little more contrast, makes the subjects pop a little more. So that's pretty much it. This wraps up this tutorial. The only thing left to do here is to place in your watermark. I always go ahead and place in a linked file so that it can update with your linked file as you edit your watermark or logo. So just navigate to the file that you want to place in to the image. In this case it's my watermark. Trying to find somewhere out of the way to put it. Doesn't draw too much attention. And in this case, I think I want to have this outside of the image, so I'm going to group this all. We can just keep it called group. I'm going to press Control A to select all, and I'm going to apply a layer mask to this group, and then I'm going to press Control Alt C, and this is controlling the canvas size. You can also get there from the file menu, or actually I think it's under image. Yep, canvas size. And I'm going to bring the canvas out 2 inches, so 50 and 66. Do a little more than that. We'll do 54, 68. Alright. From there I'm going to do a new layer, press Alt and backspace, filling it with my foreground. Call that black background. Bring that to the bottom. And I'm going to take my watermark and put it down there in the gutter. You can also just use C by itself. That'll give you the crop tool and bring it down however much you need to. And you press enter to accept the changes, and you'll see your progress bar. And I'm just going to Control T, transform my background, and bring down enough room for the credits. So you get your watermark placed in there, and I'm going to go ahead and put in my photo credit. Thanks again for submitting this for the tutorial. It's been a big help. It's a great photo. So get that where you want it. Save, save, save. Make sure you're saving into the PSD and not over top of your original image. I'm going to have a tutorial coming up on how to organize and back up your files, or at least how I do it. To each their own as far as that, especially. So this is looking pretty good to me. I think from here you might want to add a vignette, so I'm going to go ahead and try that out and see how it looks. So I just create a new layer, press Alt and backspace to fill that layer with your foreground, get a large brush with 0 hardness and apply a layer mask, and then black with opacity 100. You mask out the vignette and mask in your subject. So I'm not going to do a dead center with this because obviously this area is the focal point, so that's where I'm going to brush out the vignette there and make sure that's nice and bright. So that's looking pretty decent to me. I'm going to bring this layer underneath my watermark and my photo credit, and I'm going to toggle it on and off, see what we've done here. Looks pretty good. I think I'm going to tone it down a little bit. I like for you to barely be able to tell that it's there, but as you can see, it draws your eye in regardless. So it doesn't need to be too strong. So from here, I think that wraps this one up. Click the link here for part 2. I'm going to do another photo from a friend, Mike Page. Thanks for watching.